So let's talk about how to not break viewpoint in your third person limited. And let's talk about what's awesome about third person limited, because it has become the default for most of the books that you guys will be writing. I would say the majority, 70-30 of you in this class, are probably going to be writing third person limited, just because I know what genres you're writing. Actually, I would honestly say that 1/3 of you are doing that, 1/3 of you are doing first, and 1/3 of you don't know. And so you're doing a bad version of this, just kind of by wandering through it. You want to use this intentionally. The reason for this is, if it's intentional, it allows you to evoke character in every sentence. And really good third person, particularly at the beginning of a scene, all right? At the beginning of the scene, you want to have cues whose viewpoint it is beyond saying it's the character. You want to have descriptions that are in viewpoint. The easy example this I always use is, I use the Wheel of Time because, hey, I love the Wheel of Time, if you couldn't tell. In the Wheel of Time, there's a group of characters from a desert culture. They view water very differently. And so when Robert Jordan will jump into one of their viewpoints, he will often do a description that says they couldn't believe how much water this person was drinking, or that they would use it to wash their face, or something like that. That would be in viewpoint as a description. Not, he walked over to the bucket and dumped some water on his head. He walked over to the bucket and wasted a bunch of water on his face, right? That's a different description. You can see right there how that description would change your viewpoint, your perspective as a reader. And you sometimes just need he walked over and took a ladle and dumped water on his face. The majority of your descriptions are honestly going to be that, because you don't want to draw too much attention to it. But I would say every couple paragraphs, and particularly at the beginning, you want some of these descriptions to be very in viewpoint. Even if it's not, they review the water, it's like, he grabbed a ladle of water and dumped it on his head. Man, that would feel good, as I stood there holding his towel to wipe him off. But I didn't dare, right? That's going into third person, but you just put, he didn't dare. It watched the water dribble down the head and just almost wanted to lick it off. Those are different ways to describe it, right? Different characters, different descriptions. So use your descriptions. Others are jargon. Jargon's with a J, right? I always want to put a G in it. Why don't I want to put a G? Jargon. Jargon is another thing. This is very useful in science fiction or fantasy to use jargon. Don't overload us on it, particularly weird jargon. But again, if we're using the ideal example, they call people wetlanders, or they call people foreigners. You could have, the foreigner did this. Rather than calling them by the name, you call them by something that's local to their culture, and sprinkling things like that through. Again, resist the urge to come up with too many really weird ones. This is a problem with fantasy, particularly in your first chapter. That learning curve, remember, if everything is jargon, your readers' eyes are going to cross, and they're going to be like, wow, everything is like an X and a Z. The best forms of jargon are going to feel alien but be immediately understandable, such as wetlander, right? That's a good one. And sprinkling in a few terms from the culture are okay. A few new words and things like that. But, try to use ones that are going to be immediately recognizable.
Isn't it kind of a sign of success if by the climax of the book you can have a sentence pretty much where most of the words are jargon and it's understandable?
Yes, that's kind of a goal, not a goal, but it's like I don't want to say, it's like you get points. If you can sneak that in, and by the end the character says something that would be completely unintelligible before you started the book, and now it makes perfect sense to you. But you got to be really careful about how you do that. That goes back to the learning curve and description stuff that we talked about last time, right? So these things blend together, but the idea is to do stuff like this. I prefer to frequently, not that frequently, but use thoughts in italics, stolen from the first person narrator. right? Actually going directly into first-person narrative for an italicized paragraph. Some people prefer to not do this. There's kind of division among writers. The opposing perspective is to just say, instead of, I wonder what he's having for dinner. Just saying, what is he having for dinner? And both those arguments have something to them. One's more immediate. One is kind of a hang a lantern on, oh, by the way, we're in this viewpoint, remember? Because you will say, I wonder what he's having for dinner right now, Mary thought. It's a kind of a, hey, ding, remember, we're in viewpoint. But it's less immediate, and it's a little bit more of a tell than just saying, what was he having for dinner? Or what was he doing over there? Which you can do directly in your narrative. And you'll kind of want to intentionally decide what your style is for thoughts, okay? Which of those you want to do, or what blend of them you want to use. This is probably stuff you haven't thought about a ton. Maybe some of you have. But it's actually very useful to spend some time developing your style and deciding, how am I going to indicate what viewpoint we are in, and how am I going to cement that in the reader's mind? One of the biggest criticism against new writers' fiction is that we lose viewpoint, right? You have this great action sequence or something like that, and throughout the action sequence, we never know what's happening to the character. Like a car drives off a cliff, and in viewpoint, your first reaction should be, how does the viewpoint character react to this? His head slammed back against the chair, and everything shook, and it was chaos. That's the better way to do it. A lot of newer writers will say, the car went off the cliff, flipped 3 times, smashed into the ground. Do you see the difference between those two? One is strongly in viewpoint, pulls us into the character. The other is trying to write the book like a movie, with some camera off distantly showing what's happening. This one generally, unless you're doing this one intentionally, this one generally is where you want to be, guys, because your stories are about your characters, and if we're in the character's mind, if we're feeling what the character's feeling, it'll actually be a lot more immediate to us, and it'll feel cooler to us than tumbling off the cliff, right?
So kind of related to that, I've noticed that it's hard for me to put in thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to the movie
Right.
mentality, you're just describing the action, the dialogue, but I just forget, or I don't
Right.
think of, yeah.
You
have
don't
any tips for
need to use them. Just keep that in mind. Develop your style intentionally. Some people do not like thoughts because they feel too much like they feel like those are a break of viewpoint. I think in thoughts in my head. Some people don't. And it feels alien to them when I have my characters construct complete sentences. I always am talking to myself in complete sentences in my head. And it may be appropriate you to have some characters use thoughts and not other ones, because depending on how the character thinks. If you're having trouble putting it in, first see if your readers are losing viewpoint. If they are, you've got a problem. If they're not, you may be doing these other things or these things well enough that you're holding viewpoint. The trick is we really do generally want to try and evoke emotion. We want to let us, without going into effusiveness, without overloading us on these things. We're in a character's viewpoint. We want to, as readers, know how they feel. If they go off the cliff and they're excited, that's a different character than the one who goes off the cliff and is terrified, like the rest of us. Or the one who thinks, not again, right? Like the whale. Those are different things.
The driving cat.
Yeah, they do very different things. And you want to be evoking emotions in your reader, and you want to be doing that by the way the characters are feeling about the actions. Again, don't give these big, long descriptions of what they're feeling, but do give us emotional cues. Having someone scream as their head gets smashed back and they're like, and you describe it in a chaotic way and evoke this sort of sense of terror, that's good. That's going to keep us in the character's head, okay? So, third person. Try it, be intentional about it, and make your focus and your goal on getting everything across through the character's eyes and lens. In fact, practice this week when you're writing. if you're doing first person, either one, try and do your descriptions through the character's voice. In first person, you can do it a little bit more easily. You work on, what character voice is this character sarcastic? Is this character depressed? Is this character a pessimist? The character says, and then we drove off the cliff, as I knew was going to happen. You can put it into the character's viewpoint there, and you can see right there how the first person, this one is going to be a little less immediate sometimes because of the way I just described that. But anyway, try and do this. Don't have much time to keep going on this because I want to talk a little bit about word choice, because next week we're going to have to jump to plotting, and so we have to leave some of this prose stuff behind. But yeah, hopefully this has you at least thinking about it. There are more resources online by writers talking about viewpoint and tense, and I think if you can do this and you can do info dumps really well, your first page will get read. Then you have to do character and plot really well. But the reason I decided to focus on these ones up front is these are kind of the things that you should be practicing each day as you're writing. Plot is something you will have to work on. It's almost less consciously, right? You'll get an instinct for it. But your prose, you can be like, all right, let's make this this passage more in viewpoint. Let's try and say, what would this character do? And you can do these sort of things. They'll be hallmarks of a professional writer.